Hey everybody, John Brown here again, and today I'll be reviewing Battlelore, the second edition. Now, I played and owned the original Battlelore, so hopefully I can speak pretty well to some of the differences, but also this video is for anyone that hasn't played Battlelore before, any other Commands and Colors games. These are light war games that use hand of cards that players play to determine their movements, if you're not familiar with it. So let's take a look at how it's played, what I think of this game overall, and if this game is an improvement over the original. Alright, one of the first things, if you haven't played a Command and Colors games, and these refer to games that use this sort of system, whether they be, Battlelore, Command and Colors, or something like Memoir 44. Basically, you're going to have a hand of cards, and each round you're going to play one card, use it for its actions, and then draw a new card at the end of the round. And that's pretty much all you need to know. A lot of the cards are going to have basically where you can move units. So for example, if I played this card, I could pick 2 units on my left flank and 1 unit in the middle. And if we look at the board, we see that it's divided into 3 sections with terrain on the board, and I haven't set out the units yet, but you see the lines in the middle of the board basically delineating where each section is. Now, if a character happens to be on this space, they count as either on the left or the middle. There are also special cards that let us do other things, like order 3 archer units and then give them special abilities, or 3 cavalry units. There's all different kinds of cards in the game, so it is a bit random which cards we're going to have. There is a optional rule where we can start with a certain setup to make sure we're kind of balanced at the beginning, but there is a bit of randomness in the game, and it is actually also tactical, though, trying to figure out which cards to play when. You don't always want to use your best cards right away. You can always discard any card and move any one unit. If you have played a Command and Colors game and haven't played Battlelore before, one of the things, the main thing that makes Battlelore different is the lore. Here we see 2 lore decks, one for each side, and if you have played Battlelore, you'll see this is quite different than the original game. And basically, lore is a resource we'll gain during the game, depending on how we roll our dice, and then at the end of a round, we can either gain 2 lore, we can gain 1 lore and draw a lore card, or we can draw 2 lore cards and then discard one of them. It can be one that we already had in our hand, though. It doesn't have to be one of the 2 that we drew, which can be useful getting rid of lore cards that we maybe can't use. So these cards are going to give us all different variabilities in power based on how much they cost. They act almost as like different spells or battle tactics we can use whenever we would be allowed to play them on our card. So that's what makes Battlelore a little bit different than some of the other games in the system. And some of the things that make Battlelore unique from the older version of Battlelore, the original edition. Here we see the units, and one of the things about this is this game is entirely different thematically. The original Battlelore had kind of a semi-historical feel, and then with mythological characters thrown on top. And this game is just going with the mythological characters. It's set in the Runebound universe, kind of the Descent universe, so that's where we get the straight-up thematic feel of a fantasy game, as opposed to a game that's also trying to base itself somewhat in historical battles. And we can see here the regular footman unit, the archer unit on each side, the cavalry-type unit on each side, a heavy unit on each side, and there are multiples of all those in each army, and then there's one big unit for each side as well. Example of a card. These cards show us for each army on each side, because the armies are asymmetrical in the powers they have, basically. Same number of units available on each side, but they have different powers. So this one, for example, would have a movement of 3, would roll 3 dice when it attacks. There are 3 pieces in a unit, and then they have special abilities. An ability that they're always going to have, and an ability when they roll a certain side of a die when they attack. And then each army is going to have different separate abilities. Again, abilities they'll have normally, and this character doesn't actually have any those special abilities, but they have 2 different abilities that are always available. And this is a single unit, and this is that big Rock Warrior, the big eagle type thing. It has 4 health, so their damage tokens keep track of it, and when it takes 4 damage, it actually dies, because it is only 1 piece in the unit. It has 4 health and can move 4 attack and can move 3. Mentioned the dice are also different from the original Battlelore. These 2 symbols are each going to count as a hit in a melee attack. However, this 1 sword symbol will not hit if a unit is considered weak. When is a unit considered weak? When it only has 1 piece left. Now, the big individual units when they start with 1 piece are never weak, so they will always hit on 2 sides of the dice. this target is a symbol for whenever a archer unit is going to hit. So they only have one symbol, but it's never lessened their odds to hit when they are attacking if they're weak. There is a retreat symbol here. For those of you who have played Command & Color games before, you're used to retreating, but retreating works a little bit differently in this game. So if we had an example here where these two characters were fighting, and they would both be weak if they only had one left, and the blue player would have to retreat. Now, they are always going to retreat in this direction, away from the unit that they're fighting. So if we were like this, then they would have to retreat in this direction. Now, if that unit was blocked for some reason, couldn't retreat, for example, if it was actually the red unit that would have to retreat, they would be destroyed because they would have to retreat and it would put them off the edge of the board. And you could potentially have to retreat more than one space, and you'd lose a unit for each space you can't retreat or take a wound. However, if a unit has a friendly unit directly in the area where they would retreat to, they ignore all retreats in this game, so just something a little bit different. Units can always battle back, or basically have a counter move if they survive a melee attack, and also if a unit is destroyed or has to retreat, so if we had a situation like this, where they were either destroyed or had to retreat, on the attack, not on the counterattack, this unit could move up and in. Some units have more abilities where they can maybe move more than once or attack after, things like that. But all units have that availability. Two other sides to the dice. The lore symbol, whenever we roll this, we get a lore token. That will give us more resources to play lore cards. And then there's this symbol. This is a special symbol that, like we saw in some of the character cards, will allow us to do something. For example, the one side has an archer who can put a poison token on someone, and then when a unit is poisoned, they can use lore symbols instead of gaining a lore to do extra damage. There's all different kinds of special abilities that might trigger when that is rolled depending on the unit. And remember, each unit will have different abilities available on their cards for quick reference. This game is different than other Battlelore games is the way points are scored and the way the board is set up. Instead of having a beginning scenario, players are actually going to be able to choose different starting cards like these. Now, there are different ways to do it. You can hand out 3 and pick one. You can do a campaign where you have to pick from the same letter group or things like that and then keep track of who wins. But as you can see, the terrain will be set up like I did on the board here. If these were the 2 cards that were picked, each player would set up the terrain as it's shown, and then the area in their color, in the blue or the red, is the area where they can place units. Depending on the card they pick, different things or abilities will trigger, and you will score points different ways. In other games, basically, you destroy an entire unit to get a point. And this is very different. So, for example, if we look at the bottom card here, during setup, each Citadel Guard unit you deploy cost 1 fewer point. So what exactly does that mean? And well, and we see we gain victory points for every 2 building hexes occupied by a friendly unit. Well, first let's quick look at the terrain, and then we'll talk about mustering an army and how that all works. So, we see different buildings and water and things like that. In general, water is impassable. Forest, in general, and hills block line of sight. Hills allow you to see over other units so they don't block line of sight. Forest stop movements, things like that, building stop movement, they affect the dice roll and things like that, so they certainly have an effect on the game. But we can have certain areas on the board that are worth 1 or 2 victory points for controlling each round. And in this example, we saw we get victory points for controlling the buildings out on the board. So each player is going to have a different setup for rules that might be able to be bent during the game, and also how they score points. Now, if we look at mustering units, now here's a whole deck of cards that show a point value and the stats for a unit. Now, these are not the character cards that actually show you all the information. These are just kind of quick reference information that show you all the different units, and there's lots of each one. So whenever we set up and muster our armies, we can place these cards face down in any of the areas that we can potentially put units. And we can fill up all of those areas with cards because there are a bunch of these decoy cards there too. So we can fill up all of these areas, and the other player isn't going to know where we're setting up our armies. So for example, if we wanted to put a Citadel Guard over here, we could do that. We could put a decoy card right here. So our opponent on the other side, it will be setting up their armies, and they won't see what we're doing. You have a certain number of points you can use to build your army, and for example, we see this Rock Warrior is going to be 8 points. We can also, if we need a few more points, put something out like a command tent that limits where we can place units and basically gives the opponent 2 points if they can capture it. So if you need a few more points to get an army out, it's kind of a risk-reward thing that I think is pretty interesting. This out as an example of how asymmetrical the different armies really are. And the Blood Harvesters have a rather interesting ability. They can add a die for each combat roll performed by this unit for each figure that's missing from the unit. So normally they would roll 3 dice, but if they were down to 2 units, they would actually roll 4 dice. They also, as an ability, when they roll that special symbol, can basically cause an extra damage and get rid of one of their units. So they could potentially, if they had one hit, get rid of both of these guys and lose a unit, and now they're rolling an extra die. So another risk-reward sort of thing, where they're basically willing to punish themselves in order to do more damage. And there are other special abilities in the game. One thing that I find in particular interesting is like the flanking ability. So if the blue player was attacking in this situation, and this unit has the flanking ability, which it does, because there's another unit that is adjacent to the unit being attacked that has the flanking ability, these guys are going to get an extra die roll. Now this guy with flanking won't get it, someone else would have to have it for him to be able to get it, but just one other little touch that I think makes the combat a little bit more interesting than some of the other games. Alright, so did Fantasy Flight do a good job? Yes, I just slow clapped you, Fantasy Flight, not sarcastically, but serious, like, well done, evil genius, maniacal slow clap. This was brilliant. A lot of the things are going to be similar, the way the cards work and whatever, but the decisions that were made and the changes were fantastic. First, I want to talk about a few just potential negatives. The Fantasy Flight insert, if you bought Fantasy Flight games, you know what they're like. I'd show it to you, but I already pitched it. There's no card holders. You can get those elsewhere. It's not a big deal, but I kind of liked having those in some of the other games. And some people might not like certain aspects, like the lore deck, instead of putting points into the lore and things like that, you just have a lore deck that you're drawing from, but there's one for each side. I actually think I like this better, because here's the thing, you lose the ability to put points into certain things, but I didn't necessarily enjoy that all that much. It didn't give the game necessarily all that much of a different feeling, in my opinion, whereas these, both sides play differently, and I actually think building your army and using those points for the different abilities, the armies are asymmetrical, the lore is asymmetrical, I think that feels great, and I enjoy putting together your army more than choosing what you're going to put into lore. So that was very well done. These scenarios, this is a big plus. Instead of just destroying units where you have this guy with one left and oh no, he's going to get a point for that and things, and maybe turtling and things, I don't know if it makes the game necessarily more strategic, but it makes the strategy in the game more interesting, in my opinion. So basically, Fantasy Flight streamlined the things that should be streamlined. The dice with the hits on the melee, the target for the hit on the archer, the or whatever. I like this system so much better than looking at the banners and the colors. Each unit does a certain thing. We have what it does on the card. So they streamlined all that. They streamlined the things that I think should be streamlined. Some people might say, oh, it takes away from what is command and color. I think that command and color feel is still definitely there. The cards basically work the same. And again, if you don't like that sort of thing, it's probably not going to convert you. If you do, I think you will like this. If you haven't tried it, here's a good place to start. It streamlines those things that weren't necessarily confusing but didn't need to be there, and it expands the things that are enjoyable, like building your army and things like that. So I think they pretty much made the right choices across the board. So well done, Fantasy Flight. Pretty much every decision I have to agree with, and I said I used to own Battlelore. I don't anymore. I got rid of it because this edition is definitely replacing it. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Be sure to check out my YouTube channel if you're watching me on Board Game Geek. I'll put a link to it there. If you have any suggestions, things you want to see, let me know, and hopefully I will be talking to you guys again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.